All right, good morning and welcome to Counterpoints. Before we get into the show today, I wanted to do a quick update from last night. The crackdown on campus protests continues. We can actually roll. We have some footage from a GW University student that was sent to us last night. Here's police arresting a student in a wheelchair, putting him in the paddy wagon there. Here's a minor who was also participating in the protest that they put into the police car there. There was also a crackdown at FIT, Fashion Institute of Technology, up in Manhattan. Also, UMass Amherst saw their encampments swept in what was a pretty severe crackdown. So these are unfolding day after day. Our Counterpoints Friday show is going to touch on these campus protests. So we're going to have Glenn Greenwald in debate with Ilya Shapiro. And I think it's going to be a fascinating one. Shapiro has been basically called like one of the lead champions of this crackdown. Right. And Greenwald has been one of the lead opponents of the crackdown. All of it extra interesting, I think, because Shapiro himself was canceled back in 2022.
Not long ago. And recently wrote a fairly moving essay about the experience of cancel culture. They're also both lawyers. So I think that's going to be pretty interesting from a legal perspective, what the limits of free speech are. And
so if you want to get that early, it'll be out Thursday evening. You have to go to breakingpoints.com, become a subscriber. Most of you probably are already subscribers. Like, how could you not be? But if you're not, go to breakingpoints.com, subscribe so you can get it earlier in your inbox. Otherwise, that show will be out to you Friday morning. We're going to talk about the ongoing Israeli invasion of Rafah and the U.S. Response to it. Emily, we've also got the Trump trial. This is getting fun.
Yeah, that's right. Stormy Daniels testified for the prosecution in the hush money trial yesterday in New York. Donald Trump, man, do we have some interesting updates from inside the courtroom because Donald Trump was reprimanded, and we'll tell you why.
We do indeed, as Crystal would say. Yes. TikTok is suing under the First Amendment to overturn the attempted ban. We're going to get into why. I think we both think they have a pretty strong case. There was an assassination attempt against Zelensky. We'll get into that and its implications, as well as a new report on Gen Z debt.
You know, and I think there's a media story on Gen Z debt as well, because just a couple of weeks ago, you probably remember there were viral charts showing how great Gen Z is doing compared to other generations. So we'll dive into all of that. But Ryan, let's start in Rafah, where we have images. We can start roll. This is
roll this first tear sheet here. It's from Al Jazeera that the U.S. has been saying that this invasion of Rafah, and this has been interesting to watch unfold. So if Israel finally launches this much-awaited invasion of Rafah, the response from the United States has been to say that actually this is not really an invasion of Rafah. This is a targeted assault, a surgical operation aimed at disrupting Hamas infrastructure, and also particularly went after the Rafah border crossing. We can roll some of the footage from this yesterday. They went after the Rafah border crossing, and the argument was that Hamas, as the de facto government, has been running this border crossing, and as a result has been collecting customs revenue. And that customs revenue then, fuels Hamas's infrastructure and existence, and so therefore Israel's going to go in and it's going to seize the border. The border crossing is not that deep into Gaza. So you can do a kind of targeted operation there. At the State Department yesterday, a number of reporters were asking, okay, you're saying this is not a major military operation, that these are just a collection of small military operations. Isn't there a point at which a lot of small operations add up to a major military operation? And they acknowledged yes. So it became this like philosophical debate about how many angels can dance on a pin. When it moves from a targeted surgical operation, how many targeted operations become until they become a major military operation. So we can put up this next element from I believe this is from the Wall Street Journal here. So the rift that is developing between the United States has to do with the insistence over months and months and months that Israel not launch an invasion into Rafah. Yet, that entire time, Biden continued sending weapons up until just last week, when apparently roughly 3,500 bombs were withheld, because the U.S. finally started taking Israel at its word that they actually did plan to launch this invasion, which they had been saying that they were going to launch for a very long time. At the State Department yesterday, I asked, what went wrong internally? Like, you going to review your process? Like, how do you end up accidentally arming an operation that you say that you oppose? Like, how does that happen?
Surely not the first time we've done that.
Well, interestingly, and we can move to this next element. Politico and others reported that the State Department is indefinitely delaying the release of its national security memo that is aimed at determining whether or not Israel has committed war crimes with American weapons. If they conclude that they did, this report is supposed to be due today. If they conclude they did, the U.S. would have to stop sending Israel weapons. So they said, we're actually not going to submit this on time. They say they hope they're going to get it done soon, but it's an awful lot of work. And at the briefing yesterday, they said it was the first time we've ever done something like this. So it's taking a little longer than we expected. Matt Lee, the AP's State Department reporter, said, wait a minute, hold on a second. Did you just say you've never put together an investigation into whether the countries that you're arming have committed war crimes reports?
Right.
Like have committed war crimes? Like, you've never done that before? So, well, we've never done it like this.
Mm-hmm. And this is all related to the Leahy law.
Right. Right. There are laws on the books that say the State Department is supposed to care. Josh Paul quit because Josh Paul, State Department employee, his job was to kind of investigate and certify whether or not the arms that were going out the door were going to be used to commit human rights abuses. He said that after October 7th, all checks on that were eliminated, and any effort that he made to interrogate whether or not this was going to go to a unit or to be used in a way that was against international law would be just bulldozed, and the arms would go out the door. That's why he famously kind of quit in protest. So we're not sure when we're going to get this report on Israeli war crimes. All of this coming to a head at the exact same time. I was at an event last night where Representative Ro Khanna spoke, and this is my fancy camera work here. He criticized the State Department and the administration for this delay of this report, and said that he'll be introducing legislation to block offensive weapons shipments to Israel while this Rafah assault is ongoing. We can roll this clip from Ro Khanna.
And our entire government has said going into Rafah would be a catastrophe. So I will be introducing an amendment again in the House Armed Services Committee on May 22nd to stop again any offensive weapons going in to Netanyahu until this invasion stops. And I'm very, very disappointed that the administration is not coming out with its report that was due to the United States Congress on whether there were human rights violations and international law violations that have been committed in Gaza. That report was supposed to be to Congress on May 8th, and it has been indefinitely delayed with no explanation of why. So I know we're here to talk about climate, but of course, as we're seeing the destruction of our planet in Gaza, one can't help but think of the interconnection between the two.
That was at an event for the youth climate group, Climate Defiance. Ro Khanna there talking about the decision not to release this report yet, or the failure to release the report at this point. Emily, where do you come down on this? Are we looking at a major military operation invasion into Rafah, which has included shelling? There's footage of tanks shelling tents. There have been airstrikes that have killed a number of civilians, as well as the taking over of the border crossing, which a source confirmed to me did result in the destruction of about 3 to 4 major aid trucks. There have been reports that it was many more. My source, who does work on the ground there, says that no, it was 3 to 4 aid trucks. But when you have miles of aid trucks, every aid truck that you blow up and don't move out of the way, it just delays aid getting in further. Israel has so far just completely blocked ingress and egress at the Rafah border crossing as full-blown famine has reached the north.
So this is where I would say that major is relative, because I don't know that there's any way.
It feels major.
I don't know there's any military incursion into Rafah that can be anything but major. And that is a concession I think Israel implicitly makes when they say this is necessary to, quote unquote, eradicate Hamas. And meanwhile, by the way, I think this is one of the strangest things that's happening right now. Not strange in that it's unexpected, but strange in that it just piques your curiosity as to how they are, quote, eradicating Hamas while also negotiating a peace deal with Hamas.
Right.
And while the Rafah, so they say they killed, 20 militants over the last 48 hours, something like that. It might be more. Hamas, obviously, was it Sunday that they got 4 Israeli.
Near the Kerem Shalom crossing, right?
Right, they killed 4 IDF soldiers, but there's just no way, I think, specifically with Rafah, that you can do anything there that isn't major. And one question I had for you, Ryan, you had mentioned that you were at the State Department briefing yesterday, and we went through both the Al Jazeera article and the Wall Street Journal article about how the Biden administration obviously has always said that this would be a sticking point. Now, whether they're able to actually execute on it being a sticking point when they're so deeply entangled in this conflict is a different question. What sense do you get? I mean, just having been in the room at the State Department yesterday, asking questions, Matt Lee pushing the State Department as well, that these are genuine frustrations. I actually think in this case, they seem to be genuine frustrations.
And it may be from a lot of officials, and sometimes the inexorable force of American policy is one thing, and what some mid-level officials want it to be is another thing, and I think that might be the case here. There does seem to be, they continue to say that they do not want Israel to launch an invasion of Rafah, that they oppose such an invasion. They were clear that, so they suggest that Israel urged 100,000 people to flee to a different zone. The State Department yesterday was clear. They don't believe that the area that they are sending those people to is adequate, because they're sending people to just giant piles of rubble. Like in their current situation, it's one of the only places that has not been reduced to rubble. And so where they're currently sheltered, you might have, say, 300 people for one bathroom. And everybody might have an average of about, it seems like 1 liter of water a day for all uses, hygiene and drinking and cooking. They're now being asked, urged, told, forced to move to this rubble-strewn area that has 0 bathrooms, 0 access to water, 0, humanitarian aid facilities set up to receive those people. And as the State Department accurately pointed out, you might tell 100,000 people to move, but once you start bombing, hundreds of thousands of people are going to move there. And you're going to have, Firefest, but actually dangerous for people.
I believe about half of the population of Gaza, roughly half the population of Gaza, is around Rafah, but at least before recent evacuation started. And obviously, Israel did the sort of usual leaflets and text messages and all of that. But the point from some genuine complaints in the United States is, but to where? If you're dropping leaflets, where are you telling people to go? And Israel will come back and say, I mean, we're doing what we can do.
Right. They bought a bunch of tents and they put them by the rubble.
Right.
And anybody with any sense is like, that's okay. That might be okay for like an hour, but you can't live like that.
Well, and here's
what if you get thirsty? What do you do? What if you have to go to the bathroom?
Yeah.
Like, what if you have to do all the things that humans do when they're trying to stay alive?
And again, the negotiations were just a sloppy disaster this week. I know Crystal and Sagar covered this as well, but Israel and the United States were on completely different pages, and this is the way the deal fell apart. Whether there was even a deal that was workable, we still honestly don't really know what happened with that. But all of this is, again, in the name of, quote, eradicating Hamas while they're negotiating a peace deal with Hamas. So I just think that tells you a lot in and of itself about what's happening right now.
And the State Department was yesterday saying, and so was John Kirby over at the White House, that they have a lot of hope that the deal will be overcome, because the differences between the deal that the U.S. called extraordinary and worked out with Israel and presented to Egypt and Qatar, which presented it to Hamas, are trivial. Like they are minor differences, and those two minor differences are. And do we have the Netanyahu? Because we can start with Netanyahu here if we do.
Yeah.
So let's roll Netanyahu. This is his basically the argument that he's making. And if you can just read the translation on this if you're watching it. Otherwise, basically what he's saying is that there was no ceasefire deal on the table, for Hamas to accept, and Hamas made changes to the deal. And the changes were major, and that it was a gigantic ruse to make Israel look like it doesn't want peace, when in fact Israel does want want peace, although he contradicts himself because he says, Israel, does not want peace if it means that any formation of Hamas, remains in Gaza.
Right, but I mean, it's absurd when you're negotiating that with
right, they're
Hamas.
negotiating with
Hamas is already in northern
us.
Gaza once again,
Right, and so basically the differences were around the definition of sustainable calm. And the New York Times and others have reported on the slight tweaks that Hamas did make to the ceasefire deal that they then accepted. And so Israel had not defined the phrase kind of sustainable calm in the document. And sustainable calm is the phrase they're using to replace permanent ceasefire, because permanent ceasefire has become toxic and they're fighting over it. And so that was the substitute that kind of U.S., Israel, Egypt came up to. Okay, let's agree to a sustainable calm. And Hamas basically defined sustainable calm as something like a permanent ceasefire. And the U.S. had agreed to that. The U.S. privately had assured Hamas, okay, yes, like if you do get through all these different phases, then yes, we will assure you that Israel will not relaunch a war in 4 or 5 months or whenever this is over. The other difference was that the initial phase of hostage release was supposed to be in the first proposal 6 weeks. Hamas slowed that down in its response to three hostages every week, and which adds up to more than 6 weeks. And Hamas also said, not all of these 33 that you want are actually alive. And so we can't guarantee that. And so while that is a big difference, if that's true, at this point, there's nothing Hamas can do about that. Like they have the living hostages that they have. Israel's persuasive counterargument to me is those who are in ill health need to be released as fast as possible.
Exactly.
Like they need to get out.
Right.
Because they're dying.
Right.
Everyone in Gaza is dying. The conditions are horrific. Not only do they risk getting blown up in a bombing, but there's no medical system to speak of. There's little access to clean water, and there's very little food. So if you're a hostage who's in ill health, elderly, you, just like everyone else in Gaza, is suffering, even though, ironically and paradoxically, the hostages have more value probably to Hamas than a random Palestinian civilian, because they're going to be traded for Palestinian hostages that are in Israeli administrative detention. The one other thing that Hamas said was that Israel had wanted to take 200 people off the list that they would not release, and Hamas said, no, don't take anybody off the list that you're not going to release. But ultimately, of course, it's up to Israel who they let out of their prisons. So no matter what they agree to. And then with the last agreement, Israel went out and rearrested a bunch of the people that they arrested, because they know where they are.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.